Back in the summer of 2001, just a few weeks after our high school graduation, my friends and I, Eli, Noah, Ty, and me, Brandon, set out on one last trip before life pulled us in separate directions. We were 19, invincible, and desperate to stretch the final threads of freedom before they snapped under the weight of college schedules, job interviews, and adulthood. We weren't looking for hotels or beaches. We wanted wilderness, real, raw, untouched America. Whisper Lake was our answer. Tucked deep in the southern stretch of Indiana, near the edge of Hoosier National Forest, the lake was barely a dot on most maps. No cabins, no gift shops. Just an unmarked trail, dense trees, and stories passed down by local hunters and hikers. Stories we didn't believe at the time. They said Whisper Lake got its name not from the wind or the water, but from the voices. Whispers in the woods, people gone missing, lights in the trees. Nonsense, we told ourselves. Just tall tales told around campfires. That's what we thought, anyway. The drive out was long and winding, the kind that makes you realize just how far from civilization you've gotten. The further we went, the narrower the roads became, until we were basically following a dirt path with tree branches scraping the sides of Noah's old Jeep Cherokee. We reached the lake just before dusk. The sky was streaked in warm oranges and reds, the treetops lit like the world was on fire. Whisper Lake lived up to its name. It was still as glass, reflecting the sky so perfectly that for a second, it felt like we were floating between two heavens. We found a clearing about 20 yards from the water. It was small, but just right for 2 tents and a fire pit. The air smelled like pine, wood smoke, and wet earth. A hawk circled above, its silhouette sharp against the bleeding sky. It felt perfect. That first evening, we did what all teenage boys do on their last hurrah. We built a fire, roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, and passed around cheap beer we'd swiped from Ty's garage fridge. We laughed too loud, talked about girls, movies, and the future we couldn't imagine. Eli even brought his old acoustic guitar and strummed out some half-remembered chords. The mood was light, easy. Then the night came. The fire started to die down, leaving behind a soft glow and a bed of coals that pulsed like embers in a dragon's chest. The stars came out one by one, and the lake turned black. Still, unmoving. That's when we heard it. It was subtle at first. Just a whisper, barely louder than the breeze brushing through the leaves. "You need to leave." We all froze. I thought maybe it had come from Eli. He liked to screw with us. But the look on his face said otherwise. Eyes wide, jaw tight. Noah broke the silence. "Did you hear that?" "Probably some deer," Ty said quickly, though his voice cracked on the last word. Then it came again. Louder. Closer. "You need to leave. Now." We grabbed our flashlights without speaking. It was like an invisible cord pulled us toward the woods. None of us suggested staying behind. We were too curious, too stupid. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. No wind, no crickets, just the crunch of our boots on leaves and twigs. Even the air felt different, thicker somehow, as if the trees were exhaling something heavy and ancient. Then we saw him. He was standing just off the trail, half in shadow, half caught in our flashlight beams. A man in a faded park ranger uniform, the fabric stained and wrinkled like it hadn't been washed in weeks. His hat sat low over his face, but when he turned slightly, the moonlight caught his eyes. They were wide, too wide, like a deer's in the moments before it bolts into traffic. His voice was slurred, thick with alcohol. "You boys, you shouldn't be here." Eli stepped forward. "We're just camping. Is something wrong?" The ranger swayed slightly on his feet. The smell hit us next. Not just alcohol, but sweat and something else. Rot, maybe. Decay, like wet meat left out in the sun. "They watch the lake," he mumbled. "We'll watch the people. Take the ones who don't listen." "Who?" I asked before I could stop myself. But he just shook his head, eyes darting behind him into the darkness. "They're not animals. Not anymore." Then he turned and vanished into the trees, silent as fog. We didn't follow him. We didn't say a word, just turned around and headed back to camp, fast. The clearing looked different when we returned. Wrong. The fire was nothing but ash. One of the tents had been slashed down the side like with a knife. Our food was dumped out, torn open. Brandon's sleeping bag was gone. No animal did this. That was when we heard the branches snap behind us. Two men stepped into view. Not rangers, not hikers. One was tall, rail-thin, with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. The other was short and stocky, face covered in a patchy beard. Their clothes were filthy, layered in rags and denim. The taller one had something in his hand. Looked like a crowbar or tire iron. "Thought they'd run," the bearded one said, kicking through our gear. "Maybe they're hiding." The other one sniffed the air. "They always hide. Doesn't help." We dropped behind a fallen log just outside the fire ring, holding our breath. My heart pounded so loud I was sure they could hear it. My hands were slick with sweat. "They'll come out," the stocky one whispered, "if they want to live." They lingered for what felt like forever, talking in low voices, about traps, about catching another one last spring, about the girl who screamed too loud. It wasn't just robbery. It wasn't even about scaring people. It was something darker, something broken inside them. When they finally left, disappearing into the woods again, we didn't wait. We ran. Branches whipped our faces. Roots tried to grab our feet. We sprinted until our lungs burned, until we saw the dim red light of the ranger station at the edge of the service trail. The man inside was clean-cut, sober, and alarmed. His name was Ranger Price. When we told him what happened, his face went hard. "You saw them?" he asked quietly. We nodded. He cursed under his breath. "Locals. They've been around for years. Real sick bastards. We've been trying to catch them." He called the sheriff. A search party was sent out. They found signs, makeshift camps, traps, even some items that matched missing persons reports from years ago. We left the next morning under armed escort. Never looked back. But that summer didn't leave us. I still dream about Whisper Lake, sometimes. About the way the woods swallowed sound. About that voice in the dark, and those eyes watching us from the trees. Real monsters don't need fangs or claws. Sometimes they just wait in the shadows with a smile and a story. After what happened at Whisper Lake, I swore I'd never set foot in another forest again. For years, the memories haunted me. The shattered silence, the moonlit eyes in the trees, the distant sound of footsteps that never belonged. But trauma has a way of connecting you to others, drawing you into stories you wish you'd never heard. That's exactly how I came to learn about Black Elk Pines. It wasn't through a police report or news head. It came from a woman I met 15 years later at a support group in Indianapolis. Her name was Rachel, and as soon as she started speaking, I knew she'd seen something too. Something real. Something evil. She told me her story one rainy Tuesday night, while the others in the group were still making awkward introductions. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but every word cut like a knife. And now I can't stop thinking about it, so I'm writing it down. Not because I want to relive it, but because people need to know what's still out there. Hiding in the trees. Waiting. Back in the summer of 1992, Rachel was 11 years old. Her parents, Walter and Helen, were the kind of folks who clipped articles about national parks and kept them in folders. They'd planned their trip to Black Elk Pines for months. 2 weeks of hiking, fresh air, and no TV. Montana in July was perfect, they said. Quiet trails, chilly mornings, stars bright enough to touch. And Black Elk Pines wasn't like Yellowstone or Glacier, crowded with tourists and overpriced lodges. No, this was real wilderness. Isolated, beautiful, dangerous in ways most people didn't understand. They arrived late in the afternoon, the family station wagon bumping over a gravel road that wound like a snake through thick pine groves. The campsite was basic. A metal fire ring, a roped-off patch of dirt for a tent, and a bear box for food storage. But the scenery was breathtaking. Towering trees surrounded them on all sides, and a cold stream babbled just down the hill. Rachel wandered through the clearing while her parents pitched the tent, marveling at how the trees seemed to stretch forever. The sunlight filtered through in golden shafts, catching the dust in the air like glitter. It didn't feel dangerous, not yet. That night, they made chili over the fire. Her dad told silly ghost stories. Her mom read aloud from a paperback novel, while Rachel watched the sparks drift into the dark canopy above. The fire crackled, crickets chirped, the wind whispered through the pines. It was the kind of evening that made you forget the rest of the world existed. And then he arrived. He stepped out from the tree line like he'd always been there. Tall, gaunt, wearing a ranger uniform that looked one size too big. His name tag said Dawson, though Rachel would later say she never really looked at his name. Only his eyes, wide, unblinking, like he wasn't seeing them, but something just behind them, something he was trying not to let in. "Evening," he said in a dry, cracked voice. "Just checking in. You folks know the rules out here?" Walter stood and nodded. "Yes, sir. Food's in the bear box, fire's contained. We've done this before." Dawson didn't smile. He didn't move, just stood there, his hand resting lightly on the baton at his hip. Then he said it, quiet, casual, like someone commenting on the weather. "Keep your eyes open, not just for bears." Then he tipped his hat and walked back into the woods. Rachel said her mom brushed it off. "He's probably just trying to scare us into being careful," Helen had whispered. But her dad didn't look so sure. That night, Walter sat up by the fire long after everyone else went to bed, poking at the coals and watching the trees, listening. The next morning started like nothing had happened. Pancakes over the camp stove, a short hike down to the stream, laughter, normalcy, until the screaming started. It came from the next campsite over, about a quarter-mile away. Walter ran first, Rachel and Helen close behind. When they got there, they saw a young family, parents and two teenage boys, frantic, searching through torn food wrappers and overturned gear. A ranger was already there. This one was younger, clean-shaven, solidly built. His name tag read Miller. "You didn't lock your food," Miller barked, hands on his hips. "We did," the father protested, nearly in tears. "We triple-checked it last night." But the bear box stood open. No scratches, no damage, no sign an animal had touched it. "Something's wrong," Walter whispered to Helen. "Boxes don't open themselves." Ranger Miller looked shaken too. He rubbed the back of his neck, glanced toward the woods, then muttered, "You can't be careless out here." Not anymore. That night, Walter didn't sleep at all. Rachel remembers waking up just past midnight. The fire was out. The woods were quiet, too quiet. She peeked out through the mesh of the tent and saw her father sitting upright, flashlight in his lap, staring into the trees. Then she heard the noise, a soft metallic click, a rustle, the unmistakable sound of the bear box opening. Walter stood in a flash and clicked on his light. The beam cut through the darkness like a knife and landed on two figures by the food locker. One of them was Dawson. The other wore all black. His face was obscured, but he moved with purpose, grabbing bags and tossing them into a canvas sack like he'd done it 100 times. "Hey!" Walter shouted, stepping forward. For a moment they froze. Then the man in black dropped the sack and bolted. Dawson hesitated just a second longer. Just long enough for Walter to see something in his eyes. Not fear, not guilt, hunger. Then he ran too. Walter didn't chase them. He went straight back to the tent, grabbed the car keys, and told Helen to wake Rachel. "We're leaving," he said, "now." At dawn, as they pulled out of the campsite, a truck rolled in from the main road. It was Ranger Miller. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked. Walter hesitated. One of them was Dawson. Miller shook his head slowly. "That's not Dawson. Dawson disappeared 3 years ago." "What?" Helen gasped. "We've had people dressing up, pretending to be rangers. First it was just petty theft. Now—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Rachel never went camping again. She couldn't walk past a man in uniform without flinching. Her parents tried to pretend it was just a misunderstanding, but she knew better. Years later, when she was in college, she found an episode of a true crime podcast that made her blood run cold. It was about Black Elk Pines, about two men, one in a ranger uniform, one dressed in black, suspected of stalking campers for years, luring them, watching them, disappearing when law enforcement came close. The show didn't name names, but Rachel didn't need names. She knew what she saw. I believe her, every word, because I've been there too. And now, you have to wonder, how many others have met a smiling ranger in the woods and never made it home? How many voices in the forest aren't echoes, but warnings? How many stories like Rachel's are out there, buried beneath leaves and silence? Because the woods don't forget, and neither do the ones who wait inside them. After hearing Rachel's story, I became obsessed, not just with her memory of Black Elk Pines, but with the idea that what happened to her and what happened to me at Whisper Lake might not be isolated incidents. I started digging, piecing together local legends, law enforcement reports, even obscure blog posts and archived message boards. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. Some connection, some proof that these weren't just campfire stories or the paranoid delusions of kids who spook themselves in the woods. What I found was worse. There was a pattern: small parks, remote trails, places that looked safe in the daylight and swallowed you whole by midnight. That's when I stumbled on Coldwater Ridge. No headlines, no police blotter, just a name buried in a 2006 forum post titled, "Have you ever seen a ranger that wasn't real?" The user's name was anonymous, but the story they told, it didn't feel like fiction. I traced the details to an old missing persons case filed in 1982. Two men, college friends from California. The report said they were last seen heading into the Sierra Nevadas. Their bodies were never found. No further investigation, cold trail. But a week later, I found someone who remembered them. A woman who'd worked at a ranger station near the trailhead. She didn't want to talk on the phone. We met at a diner in Reno. She brought a faded photo of the two men. One of them, she said, had come stumbling out of the woods alone at dawn. His face was gray, his lips cracked and bleeding. She said he never spoke to anyone, not the rangers, not the cops. Not even to her. Just stared at the wall like he was listening to something only he could hear. She said his name was Henry, and this is what I believe happened to him. In the early fall of 1982, Henry and his best friend Caleb left Bakersfield with nothing but their camping gear, a cooler of beer, and a faded map of the Sierra Nevada trails. They were both in their mid-20s, recent graduates who hadn't quite figured out what came next. The trip was meant to be one last hurrah before real life kicked in. Caleb had just accepted a job in Sacramento. Henry didn't have a plan yet, just a backpack and a restless feeling he couldn't shake. They arrived at Coldwater Ridge just before sunset. The road was narrow and cracked, weaving through towering pines and yellowing aspens. The trailhead was empty. No other cars, no signs of fresh boot prints, just silence, save for the wind in the trees and the low gurgle of a creek nearby. It was perfect. They set up camp about half a mile in, beside a shallow stream with smooth rocks and water clear enough to see the fish swimming below. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine resin and damp moss. The sun dipped low, turning the sky a deep orange, and shadows stretched long across the forest floor. They built a fire, opened 2 beers, and watched the flames dance. Caleb joked about bears. Henry teased him about getting eaten first. They laughed, told stories. The kind of night that makes you forget anything bad could happen in a place so beautiful. Then the rangers showed up. They came without warning. No crunch of footsteps, no rustle of leaves, just suddenly there, standing at the edge of the firelight. The taller one was thin, with high cheekbones and a long, narrow face. His uniform looked too new, too clean. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The second was stockier, wearing a hat pulled low. His arms were thick, his boots caked in dried mud. He said nothing, just stared. "Evening, gentlemen," the tall one said. "You boys aware of the rules out here?" Henry nodded. "Yeah, bear box is locked, fire's contained, we're good." The man smiled again, wider this time. "Some folks don't come back from this ridge," he said. Caleb laughed nervously. "Is that a warning or a joke?" Neither ranger answered. They just stood there for another moment too long, then turned and disappeared into the trees without another word. Henry said the forest didn't sound the same after that. The wind stopped. The crickets went silent. Even the stream seemed quieter, as if it didn't want to draw attention. They didn't sleep well that night. Every crack of a twig outside the tent made their hearts jump. At one point, Caleb sat up and whispered that he thought he saw a flashlight moving through the trees, but when Henry looked, there was nothing, just darkness. At exactly midnight, Henry woke up again. He didn't know why, just that something was wrong. He held his breath and listened. Then he heard it. Voices, low, whispering, "They're asleep." A pause. "Go now." He nudged Caleb, who was already awake, his eyes wide and terrified. Slowly, carefully, they unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The two rangers were back, but this time they weren't checking on food safety. The stocky one held a shovel. The tall one was digging. Not a hole, a grave. Henry saw the earth piled beside them, the narrow trench cut into the soil, the way their faces were lit by the pale moonlight, expressionless, focused. They weren't speaking, not anymore. Just working in silence, as if they did this every night. Henry and Caleb didn't wait. They grabbed their boots, left everything else, and crawled backward through the underbrush until they were far enough to stand and run. And they ran. Branches tore at their faces. Rocks bit into their souls. They ran without direction, without light, without breath. Just the pounding of their hearts and the sound, distant, steady, of footsteps behind them. Not fast, just following. Henry said they saw the ranger station just before dawn, a single square of light in the fog, a beacon. They pounded on the door until a young woman opened it. Her name was Grace. She worked night rotation. She said. Henry collapsed on the floor, mumbling about uniforms and graves and whispers. Caleb wasn't with him. Rangers searched the area. They found the campsite torn, abandoned, no sign of a struggle. They found the hole, empty but freshly dug. They didn't find Caleb. Grace said Henry never recovered. He left town that same week, never picked up the things he'd left behind. She said she sometimes still dreams about the way he looked when he arrived. Pale, wide-eyed, as if something had followed him out of the woods but didn't quite make it through the door. I don't know what happened to Caleb. I don't know who those men were or what they were, but I believe Henry. I believe Grace. I believe Rachel. And I believe what happened to me at Whisper Lake. These aren't stories. They're warnings. And if you ever find yourself alone in a forest, sitting by a fire, and a ranger steps out of the dark with a smile that doesn't quite feel right, ask him his name, and if he doesn't answer, run. If there's one thing I've learned from these stories, mine, Rachel's, and Henry's, it's that real evil doesn't always hide behind masks or monsters. Sometimes it walks upright, wears a uniform, and speaks with authority. Sometimes it waits in the places we feel most free, deep in the wilderness, where help is miles away and the trees swallow your screams. Each of us went into the forest chasing something simple. For me, it was a final adventure with my best friends before adulthood. For Rachel's family, it was a wholesome escape from the noise of everyday life. For Henry and Caleb, it was one last breath of freedom before responsibility set in. But nature doesn't play by our expectations. It doesn't promise safety just because your intentions are pure. And worst of all, it doesn't keep out the things that live among us. Things that look like us, talk like us, but are far, far removed from humanity. What these stories have in common isn't just terror, it's trust misplaced. We trusted the uniform. We trusted the silence. We trusted that bad things happen to other people, not us. But evil doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't care if you're careful. It watches. It waits. And sometimes it wears a smile. So if you take anything from these stories, let it be this: never ignore your instincts. If something feels wrong in the woods, it probably is. Never trust someone just because they look official. Ask questions, watch their eyes, keep your distance, and never go so far off the beaten path that no one can hear you scream. To those of you who've made it to the end of this journey, thank you. From the bottom of my heart and from everyone here at Enigma of the Unknown, we appreciate you lending us your ears, your attention, and your curiosity. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings. They're echoes. And sometimes, they're the only voice left for the people who never got to come home. So the next time you find yourself staring out into a stretch of dark trees or hearing a faint whisper on the wind, trust your gut. Turn around Get back to the firelight, and remember, not all who wander are lost, but some who vanish were never meant to be found. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep seeking the truth behind the shadows. You've been listening to Enigma of the Unknown.